And we're live. Good people, good people, good people. Welcome back to the Empty Wonderland Fading Embers podcast. It has been a minute since we showed back up. We got a lot of new things happening here. We've got a new season. We're working on season 2. And we're going to be exploring a lot of different topics. It's not just going to be album reviews. It's not just going to be um, books and stuff like that. Not just interviews. We're going to be doing a whole lot of crazy stuff. It's going to be lots and lots of fun. So you're going to hear me say something about that every episode, but we're trying to mix it up this year. I'm Christine Benn. I'm the creative director for Empty Wonderland Collective. Um, you will catch me on here every week when we post these. And what the collective is about, we basically just believe in telling stories, particularly the stories of that God is telling to His people about Himself. But we have lots of different interests and stuff like that. So we believe in being able to tell a story clearly, tell it vividly, and to speak loudly. We want people to be able to hear and understand each other and learn from each other. So what the collective is about, just me and my friends getting together talking about stuff that we think are pretty cool. On this week's episode, Christine Benn will be joining us. She's actually a Baltimore County resident, and she is currently a grad student at the Notre Dame ESOL program. Christine, why don't you introduce yourself and a little bit, and just tell us a little bit about your experience and why ESOL.
Okay, well, first of all, good evening or good afternoon, wherever you are. Good morning, hello, etc. Again, my name is Christine, and I am this guy's wife. Um, so I discovered that I love teaching English after going to Japan, after graduating college back in 2008. The whole, long story short, just getting to Japan, it was on a whim, and everything fell into place for me to be able to go. And so teaching English was never anything on my radar, but it literally fell into my lap, and I found that I loved it. After coming back home, I was involved in tutoring students who were trying to get their GEDs, and in Charleston, there wasn't really a need for an ESOL teacher. So for those of you who are not familiar, ESOL stands for English. So TESOL is teaching English to speakers of other languages. And so that means my job is to teach the English language to those who speak other languages. So there wasn't a need for that in Charleston, and I thought that would be a good time to begin just studying, doing some online stuff. That did me some good just in terms of being able to get involved in the community later on when we transferred here to Baltimore, and working at the Esperanza Center, volunteering and being a coordinator there, and just really getting familiar with the immigrant community in Baltimore. But the online credentials, like, that's not enough. You have to have a nice shiny piece of paper that's been through an accredited institution. So that's where I am now. I am in my 3rd semester, and so far so good. Got 4 more to go. 2019.
You mentioned earlier that you taught at the Esperanza Center in Baltimore. Can you tell us a little bit more about what your experience was there, and then what's the Esperanza Center about, and what were the kind of students that you encountered?
Sure. So Esperanza Center, it's such a magical place that anyone who asks me about it, that's the very first thing that I say, it's such a magical place. It is essentially a one-stop hub for immigrants. So it's a 3-story building, and immigrants can get a variety of services. They can get on the first floor, there's client services, and that's where they can, maybe be directed to legal services or to the free clinic, to get medical assistance, even dental treatment. They don't have to be insured. They can go and sign up to ESL classes to learn English. They can sign up their kids for after school programs, to get some tutoring help and also to help them with their English as well. And there is an after school summer program, again, for youth. And amnesty, immigration laws, you name it. Like, it is literally a one-stop hub for anything and everything from I need a place to live, how do I get my driver's license, to I'm a refugee and I need amnesty. So all of that in one building is pretty cool.
Mm-hmm. So sounds like you're dealing with people from like a lot of different countries. Is it mostly like Hispanic countries, like Central America, South America, or is it people coming from overseas over the Atlantic? Like, what was the population like of the people who are coming through there?
It's people from all over. So it could be from Central America, South America, from the Caribbean. It could be, any of the plethora of countries and on Africa, Asia, Europe, you name it. So it's all over the place. Most of the refugees are probably at the time maybe Ethiopian, perhaps. I'm not quite sure, but for those who are involved in taking English classes, the largest population were Spanish speaking, but there's also Arabic speaking people, Mandarin, possibly Korean, Vietnamese, Russian, and I think that's about it off the top of my head. So literally the nations are all under one roof.
Gotcha. So you just got people from all over, and it sounds like in all of those cases, none of these individuals are native English speakers. Like if they speak any English at all, it's definitely a second or third language. And I guess you were helping them to either learn from scratch or to really help to sharpen them in their English speaking, I guess, from an American context.
Yes, that's correct. It wasn't unusual to have maybe, a few students who had never gone to school before in their own country. Mm-hmm. So, they would be literally starting from scratch because someone who's old enough to have their own children, they've never gone to school before. And so they're having to learn another language and a whole nother alphabet while also learning how to even, use a pen or pencil to write.
Gotcha. So picking up on what you just said there, you said that in some of these cases, these are adults who have their own children. So that sounds like there's two different kinds of ESOL that you have there. You have ESOL maybe like towards like children, young, and then is there like one specifically for like adults? Is there like do they have a particular title for that when you're teaching just adults in particular?
Sure. So there's ESL as another acronym. This field loves acronyms. It's English as a second language. Same idea, right? Mm-hmm. So there's ESOL or ESL for adults. That's one genre, but then there's also ESOL or ESL for children, and that is found in your public school systems.
It's like a K through 12 kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And then an adult, I guess that's like what, post-secondary, something like that?
Yeah, probably like in your either, through a nonprofit organization like Esperanza Center or Casa de Maryland, or through a community college. And so like there's the Baltimore County Community College, and there's also the Community College of Baltimore City.
So I know that everybody who gets into, I guess, and that helps us move into our next thing, because it sounds like you mentioned before, some of these students, especially adults ones, they might not have ever had an academic teacher before. So if they were coming to you, sometimes you were their very first kind of academic teacher. Um, and I know that different teachers have different kind of philosophies or different kind of things that sort of drive them, especially the further they go into the field. Do you have like a personal teaching philosophy or something that you're specifically trying to do in the world for human flourishing with with your job and with your education training that you're going through right now?
Oh, that's such a tough question to answer. Um, Even though I've written a paper on what my philosophy is, I feel like it is always, it's so fluid and it's always expanding and changing and becoming more nuanced or less nuanced all at the same time. But essentially, the whole purpose of education is to teach and to learn. As a teacher, my job is not to be the main source of information, but to impart knowledge and to also receive knowledge and to continue that cycle over and over. I mean, I think it is possible to learn from anyone and everyone. I don't care if you are, I don't know, considered an invalid by society because you don't have all your mental or emotional faculties. But I think it is very well possible to learn more of the unseen virtues from those kinds of individuals. Um, so, for example, I got an opportunity a couple years ago to go to Guatemala, and I spent the bulk of my time in, I guess, I don't want to say like a rescue hospital, but more of a space for children who had very unique needs. So, like, these are kids who would never be self sufficient in any way, shape, or form. So, they would always need care, to bathe and to feed and to cleanse and get them from point A to point B, sort of thing. But even though some of these children they aren't able to speak, or they won't, have a prom date or whatever have you, um, you can learn so much from them, whether it be patience or just being able to be delighted by simple things, um, as an example. And then, of course, you can learn from those who have all of their mental faculties and are complete nerds and can tell you about axiology and whatever else have you. So it is possible to learn from everyone. It is possible to teach everyone.
Hmm. That's deep. So actually, that's a perfect segue into my to the next sort of topic or subtopic in our discussion. We realize that you know you obviously, as an English teacher, you specialize in words. You specialize in words, syntax, grammar, and how all those things come together in the written form and in the spoken form in order to be able to convey thoughts from human to human. But we also know that language isn't strictly talking, and it's not strictly reading either. I think when I was in college, they were talking. I think my English professors were saying that 80% of language, actually, of communication, is actually nonverbal. It's like body language and stuff like that.
Yep.
Can you talk about some of the nuances of like other factors that not just body language, but any factors, I guess, that are beyond sort of written and spoken words and how they affect the communication process, and like what's that like when you're like in the classroom or out in the field?
All of it is necessary to take into consideration. So here, in the Western context of the United States, we are heavily dependent upon literacy. So
you mean like reading,
by
being
reading,
able to read a book? Yeah.
yes, being able to read. So like if you're going, to be in New York and you need to look at the metro map, well, that takes reading skills to be able to navigate that map, to understand what the colors mean and where they go. However, if you come from a place where there is more of an emphasis on oral tradition, well, the written word might not mean all that much.
Mm.
And so there are some people who, gosh, like there's just so many different things. I feel like I need you to ask me some more questions.
Well, it sounds like, just even in that example that you gave just there, that how people live affects how they use words or how they're able to communicate. You just used an example of them coming from a context where perhaps being able to read is not the primary way that they deal with each other or how their society functions. So I guess are there any other kind of examples of things that you have to take into consideration when you're teaching somebody, when you have some inkling of the context that they're coming from in terms of challenges that they might experience when they're attempting to learn? It sounds like that sounds like that would be quite a hurdle. If you came from a place where you never really read anything, even in your own language, never really read anything, and yet you still had a healthy sort of society that you're coming out of, I imagine that would be a culture shock. Come into a place like the States, or especially like an urban area where there's just your survival depends upon being able to read effectively or having someone in your group who can read.
Sure, it definitely is a culture shock, just considering, well, being literate in the United States and the public school system also comes with some assumptions. The assumption of, oh, you must know how to critically think. Has the assumption that you know how to summarize. It has the assumption that you understand that you don't plagiarize, that you have to cite your sources. But you may I may encounter a student who, like they come from a place where quoting a famous person is giving them honors, so it's no big deal, right? But over here, we're like, no, 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 pump the brakes. We don't plagiarize. You must use your own words, or you must be able to cite your sources, for example. In terms of body language, we are here in the United States, we are very, for lack of a better word, aggressive, comparatively aggressive. We use our hands a lot. We constantly like to define whatever it is that we're talking about. So we might say we or I or whatever. We like to make things very clear. Even in our writing, we have to say what we're going to talk about it, and then we're going to have to, summarize it in the end. Like, why do we do that? Or even something like eye contact. We like to look at each other in the eye, but for some places, that's not how you show respect. You show respect by lowering your eyes. Some places are very touchy-feely. Some places are not very touchy-feely. So, there's the whole personal bubble question. There's also gender expectations. That also plays into how language works as well. There may be a concept in one language that just doesn't exist in English. So,
can you give an example of that? Of something that I guess like an ordinary person could understand without having to study more?
Sure. Let's see. So, for those who like anime or anything Japanese, there is this phrase that is said, either at the end of a greeting or as you're about to leave, and it's yoroshiku, right? Or yoroshiku onegaishimasu, like if you want to keep it extra formal. the loose translation of this is, look favorably upon me. But depending on the context, like it could be, see you later, take care, or I'm counting on you to do this, or those sorts of things. But, there's no direct translation for it. So you just kind of have to come up with the best or the closest understanding for it, because it's appropriate for the Japanese context, not for the American context.
I see.
It can get extra tricky in navigating those sorts of things.
So basically, that sounds like a phrase or a word that you can try to interpret it with meaning, but there is no strict translation of that into the English language. So you have to contextually interpret that a lot, and that sounds like a phrase where that kind of thing would come up, where there has to be a lot of contextual interpretation as opposed to a strict translation, because there's not an equivalent word or phrase in English for it.
Sure, and the reverse is true. So as an ESOL teacher, I have to make nuances of English obvious. I have to make it explicit. And there are certain things that you don't realize until you have to teach it. So, for example, we like to use a lot of idioms. Things like, you're driving me crazy, or you're driving me up the wall, or check it out. Like, what does check it out mean? Check what? What does that mean?
Oh, that's funny.
Yeah, just little small things that you don't realize until someone looks at you with a confused look on their face.
Stuff that we would say stuff that two English speakers in America might say to each other effortlessly and flow along in the conversation that would make absolutely no sense to someone who doesn't speak English as a first language.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, like, I have to be able to make that as plain as possible. But what also adds an extra layer of trickiness to that is, well, one, the English language is continuously evolving. And then two, I'm working with kids. So not only do they have their own personal slang in their native tongues, they're also probably going to be picking up, the slang of English or whatever else have you. And quite frankly, I can't keep up with all that. It's utterly impossible. So it will be interesting navigating that. I'm used to working with adults, and that's a blast, but kids, that's a completely different beast. I imagine it will be anyway.
So what would you say are some of the because you mentioned earlier that you have to, one of the populations that you've had some dealings with were immigrants, and then also like refugees. So I assume I would, or at least I would imagine, dealing with immigrant populations, especially if they're immigrating from maybe cultures that are not as friendly with you, with sort of like mainstream United States culture, or someone who's a refugee who's running from sort of a war-torn situation. I imagine that that comes with hurdles in terms of being able to teach them, or these individuals being able to, because of how they may be treated in the city where you live, how that might affect their being able to make it to lessons on time, or just I'm sure that affects everything in their life, and therefore it would affect the process of you being able to teach them.
Sure. I remember reading an article about a high school student, the young lady who came from, my mind is blanking, somewhere in Africa. I hate being that vague, but somewhere in Africa, while also speaking a dialect that's not common. She'd never gone to school. And so she and her family, they lived on in a refugee camp for a time period. And so her primary responsibilities were to take care of, other like smaller children around her, and to pound yucca and to gather firewood. So very meaningful, necessary, daily, mundane work.
Like everything she was, survival. Everything she was doing was contributing to her being able to stay alive and the people around her staying alive.
Exactly. So contributing to the community, like that was her primary focus. So imagine her coming to Baltimore and seeing a stove for the first time, or seeing a refrigerator for the first time, a bus, or holding a pencil for the first time. And then also no one speaking your language. And then, you're hearing not only English, but also Spanish, probably, because that's another, huge secondary language around here. That is information overload. In the same article, she had a horrible incident where she got on the bus. She didn't know where she was going, so she ended up going, like maybe 15, 20 some odd miles away from where she was supposed to be going, and it was
wow.
And she just got off the bus and like curled up in a ball until someone was able to like call the police and help her. So like not having any language whatsoever and just going immediately into survival mode of like, okay, I just need to stay in one place and I'm going to curl up in a ball and try and stay warm.
Wow.
Yeah. So there's that. But then let's say, you are from a place that's been ravaged by war, like you come to school and you're worried about your friends, or you're attached to Instagram and you're just trying to keep up with like, okay, is so and so okay? Is my boyfriend okay? Is my girlfriend okay? What's the latest thing happening at home? So they can't really be here because of course, they're concerned about what's going on at home. But then, like to deal with the emotional, mental stress of one experiencing war while also then now being in a new place that's not your home, having to do a new language, having to navigate, the grocery store that doesn't have the same foods and flavors and smells of what you're used to, right? And so that might look like being withdrawn. That might look like, sudden weeping. That might look like, cutting and hurting themselves. So, I mean, all of this is probably, similar behavior that a native Baltimorean or anyone who has lived in an urban area that's, very violent may be experiencing that as well. Like if they're hungry or don't know where their next meal is coming from, or, family dynamics, whatever have you. So all of that, I mean, even though that's not necessarily language related per se, like those are barriers to being able to even make that connection. So that's another part of my role, is to make connections to their lives, because like it's a wealth of knowledge. We don't, just because they're here doesn't mean that their lives before and that the language that they do speak, that it's something to throw away in the garbage. Like, no, that is something to be used and something to be celebrated and to learn from. So kind of like a mutual exchange. At least that's how I'd like to have my classroom.
Makes perfect sense. So I guess the last question would be, what are your long-term goals after completing this, I guess, this next phase of your life here, which is getting through grad school? Like, what are your long-term goals, in this field?
Oh, well, my long-term goal is to be teaching until whenever. I don't want to, at least at this time, I can't imagine going back to school and trying to get a doctorate. I don't want to be involved in administration in any way, shape, or form. I just want to teach, um, and learn and grow in my craft and learn more about how to advocate for my students, locally and then also at the state and federal level. Um, and then take care of the the foreign people that are here that are calling America home, whether it's long term or temporarily. And then if I can ever go back overseas to teach again, that'd be great too. But for now, Baltimore's where it's at.
All right. Well, we have arrived to the final little portion of our episode. The Black church likes to call a shouting moment, a moment where the preacher is saying something that you, on the inside of you, you have a deep amen for, and you just want to give God a hand clap or a verbal praise for for His goodness as you hear some truth being proclaimed. So for this, we're gonna borrow that terminology because we want to talk about something that is on the inside that we feel really happy about. So for this episode's shouting moment, talk about your favorite part of your journey right now.
As a student,
Sure.
seeing them A's. I mean, working and while also handling a toddler at home and studying. I mean, I know there are some people who are doing this as a single parent, hats off. But being able to put in the work and juggle all of this and still get the A, I'm happy with that. I know it's not supposed to be about the A, but I like having the A.
Hey, ain't nothing wrong with that. Ain't nothing wrong with that. Well, good people, thank you so much for tuning in. Christine, thank you so much for your time. This episode will be up on YouTube. You folks will be able to see it there. You want to definitely check us out, Empty Wonderland Collective. We are on Tumblr at emptywonderlandcollective.tumblr.com. We're also on Facebook, Empty Wonderland Collective. We're on Twitter, the collective at Empty Wonderland. And then you can also find us on Instagram as well, Empty Wonderland Collective. And then you can find all that good stuff in the links down below. If you have a question, a comment, a suggestion, nothing, or if you just want to say hi, definitely feel free to make a comment below. If you have any questions for Christine about any of the stuff that we talked about today, or if you would be interested in a career in ESOL, TESOL, and want to know how you would get started with that, definitely feel free to leave us a comment below. Until next time, good people, that's good night.
Good night.
Grace and peace.